we need to raise the barrel. And one of the things that we need to do is improve the quality of the leadership here, quality of performance, quality of productivity. And the way to do that is not just by paying people more, it's about inspiring people to do more.
Yeah. Kul for Prime Minister, yeah! Welcome to a Digital Report podcast. I'm Jatinder Palaha, and today I'm super excited because we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects. The speaker today is Kul Mahay, and Kul is an author, speaker, trainer. He's served in the police for 32 years, and 2/3 of that service was spent in leadership levels. He's a dynamic and passionate leadership and emotional intelligence specialist who has spoken widely across private and public sectors. So welcome, Kul. Welcome to the Digital Report podcast.
Great to be here, Jatinder. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome, man. I'm like I said, I'm super excited because we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, and that's one of my favorite subjects. And I'll just share quickly how I got into that and how I kind of stumbled across it, and so why I'm so excited to talk to you about that as well. Because when I was at university doing a dissertation, right, I'm in IT, so my topic that I chose was around emotional intelligence, and I didn't know what it was at the time. I just heard it as EQ, and I went to the supervisor and said, this is a topic I'm interested in doing, my dissertation around that. She said, do you know anything about it? I said, no. She said, go do some research and then come back to me. So I went and did some research, and I found out it was about, Daniel Goleman, who created one of the founder of emotional intelligence, main person he's known as, right? And I looked into his work and I thought, oh, this is interesting, but how am I going to talk about this in what I'm doing in IT? And what was a big thing back then was like soft skills, and how do you test for soft skills and emotional intelligence and things like that in, when people go for workplaces or, any kind of enrollment into jobs and whatnot. So I ended up making a psychometric test, right? Like a basic one, yes or no answers kind of thing around emotional intelligence. And that's where I discovered this whole new space of personal development. And when I was looking back at it, I realized how much of an impact it actually had on my life. Going back to that moment, thinking, wow, like how much of what I do has stemmed from that moment, right? So that's why when I thought, yes, I'm going to have Kul, we're going to talk to you about emotional intelligence. Oh, brilliant.
Well,
Let's go, man. Let's go.
I mean, when I first came across the term emotional intelligence, I think it was in the early 90s. And I was in the police service then. I was a leader in the police service, and I sort of didn't understand the concept of emotional intelligence. I sort of knew what it was, but I largely didn't. I didn't look at it into any great depth. But I had my own individual style of leadership throughout the entirety of my service in the police service, and it's so different to my peers. Whereas a lot of my peers would rely upon the rank or the status that they hold in the organization to get things done. I, like them, was a critical commander. I had a day job, which is looking after several hundred people in any one department, any one specialist department. But my other operational command skills were varied. And I could be on any one of a number of call-out rotors, whether it be for serious crime investigation as a senior identification officer, whether it's on standby for a chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear incident, whether it's a senior identification manager for body fragmentation or mass fatality recovery, whether it's for Gold Command, firearms incidents, critical incidents, major incidents command. I had to be really, really good at being able to switch into any one of these modes. And in the first instance with any one of these crisis management scenarios, you have to get into what we call coercive leadership style. And a coercive leadership style is where you really do have to tell people what to do. It really is about command and control. It's about telling people, you do that, you do that, you do that. And because of who you are or the position that you hold, they will go, and there's no discussions. But I realized that didn't have to be my leadership style throughout its entirety. That only needed to be there for that tiny percent of the time when we're in crisis management mode, in a dynamic thinking mode. Most of the time, my leadership or the success of my leadership really depended on how I treated the people around me, how I built relationships, how I raised the awareness of my own thinking, and how my emotions might affect my actions, my thoughts, my words. and how I needed to read my environment a lot more effectively to pick out the undercurrents of how things are done, rather than just rely on policies and regulations and laws and say, hey, this is how the framework, so this is how I expect things to be done. Well, when they didn't get done that way, then I was left either frustrated or upset or angry or confused. But that's when you start reading undercurrents and you start understanding why these things are done. And the biggest skill set around that is empathy. People talk about empathy, and they talk about it in the context of understanding other people and understanding other people's emotions, not necessarily their experience, but the emotion that they feel from that experience. You can take empathy to another level. Empathy is also about understanding organizations and why some organizations make some of the decisions that they make. It's because of the unique experience and the journey that organization finds itself in. And of course, within all of that, I think the ultimate benefit or ultimate goal, if you like, of emotional intelligence is being able to build powerful, lasting, and deep relationships. And if you're not able to build good, trusting relationships built on this bridge of trust, then you're not gonna find that those relationships are necessarily fruitful. And success, the critical success factor in many situations, is on the depth, breadth, and quality of the relationships that you develop. And building relationships is not necessarily about introversion, extroversion. There's a lot of debate around introverted people. I am a natural introvert. I have been for 26, 27 years, as far as I know. I've been doing Myers-Briggs test on myself for nigh on 3 decades. I know I'm a complete introvert. But what that means for me, how that interprets and translates for me, is that I prefer to have one-on-one conversations, or conversations in very small, trusting groups that I know very well. But when I have those conversations and those relationships, they are very deep. I'm very introspective, just like many other introverts are out there. If I were extroverted, I'd find it easier to build those relationships, across a multitude of forums or in larger forums. So there's no sort of, for me, when it comes to introversion, extroversion, there's no one size fits all, and it's not one that is better than the other. They are what they are, and it's just learning more about yourself through a level of emotional intelligence, understanding your emotions and the actions that you take, and changing those actions where they don't serve you, where they're not of quality, understanding the undercurrents of your community, your organization, your team around you, and then learning within the context of that framework, if you like, how to build really, really good, lasting relationships. And then when you master all those 4 quadrants, you are sailing pretty high. Now, when I work with emotional intelligence, most people will work in emotional intelligence just around those 4 quadrants. I wanted to go in much, much deeper. So I went away and, I realized that I'd been an emotional intelligence leader. I did some...
When was that? When was the first time you thought, oh, this stuff is emotional intelligence? When was that first moment?
That's a good question. I think the awareness came around 10 years before I left the police service. Up until then, I was like everybody else, competing with all my peers for the next rank to be a better leader. And then I realized I don't need to compete with anybody but myself. I just need to compare who I am to the person that I was yesterday. And I will never be able to truly compete with anybody else, because they have a different journey, as do I. And what works for them necessarily won't work for me. What works for me necessarily won't work for them. And we all have to go on this inward journey. And I always say that inner leadership comes before outer leadership. You have to fix yourself first to be able to help others fix themselves, right? So for me, when I finally realized that, hey, my leadership style is largely emotional intelligence, I knew that I had to do a lot of building. I had to go a long way to become, to the level I am now with emotional intelligence. But that awareness was the spark for me. And I went away and I started reading. I did an awful lot of reading. I did some coaching and, qualified in coaching. I did a few qualifications in coaching, and secretly went to a lot of personal development seminars to learn more about myself, because in those days, personal development was seen a bit woo-woo, particularly in the police service.
Right.
And now I'm encouraged to see more and more police officers talking about personal development. And I was looking on LinkedIn early on today, and I was like, this is incredible. More and more senior police officers are being more human on LinkedIn. And that was unheard of back in my time. I remember I was a head of one big department, and I started off a video diary. No, it wasn't a video diary. It was more of a blog. It was a written diary. And all I was doing for my staff was on our intranet page, I was just updating my staff. Hey, this is what's going on with me this week. This is what my diary looks like for this week. Or these are the key events. And I started off a colleague of the month, reward system where people had to nominate their colleagues, and whoever got the most nominations, I'd put their picture up on the wall, and we just acknowledge them. And I remember that this one blog thing took off, and it became the second most viewed page across the whole of our police force on our intranet. So people from outside of my department were looking into my blog. And I remember moving on to a different department about a year or so later, and the first thing the head of department said to me on that occasion was, "Oh, Kul, you're not going to do this blog thing again, are you?" And I said, "Well, why are you so nervous about doing a blog thing?" Because it was the second most rated page, second most viewed page. It tells you this is what our staff want. But the police service wasn't ready for it. And thankfully now, when I look at the police service, more and more people are coming up and being more human. And, that's my style of leadership back, 10, 20 years ago now. I mean, I've left the police service 8 years ago. And, so certainly for the last 18 years, I've been consciously practicing emotional intelligence. And now, I'm a member of the Institute of Social Emotional Intelligence over in America. And now I work at a granular level when it comes to EQ. We work on 26 competency areas. We break down the 4 quadrants down into specific competencies. I find this really, really useful, because when somebody takes one of our tests and profiles and finds that their EQ levels are very low, or they find that there's room for improvement, what we can do then is analyze specifically which of their competency areas are bringing the whole of the EQ down. So it becomes much more manageable. I'm working with a corporate client now. I only work with corporate clients now, but I'm working with a corporate client now who has very high morals, very high values, and finds herself out of sync with how the organization is thinking. So consequently, what's happening with her, she finds that she has these conflict conversations that explode. She explodes, not them, but she explodes out of frustration. So when I did a profile on her, I found two of her specific competencies were very low. One was the ability to have conflict conversations. And and the way I read that is that because she's not very good at conflict conversations, she avoids them. And when it's unavoidable, she'll explode because it becomes a self-defense mechanism. And interestingly, her other competency that was low was managing her own behavior. So she has this inability to come out of her limbic brain and into a prefrontal cortex, where all logic sits within the prefrontal cortex, and the limbic brain is all about emotions. It's all about rapid thinking. It's all about life and death, survival strategies, fight, flight, or freeze responses. And she struggles to come out of that into the prefrontal cortex. So we're doing a lot of work around how can she slow her thinking down? How can she think more rationally now going forward? And I find that this works not just in the context of leadership, which is predominantly what I do. I work with all sorts of organizations around their leaders, their staff, their leadership teams, from universities through to doctors in psychology, through to police services, private sector, public sector. And my work is predominantly around if I can embed emotional intelligence thinking within the leadership structures, hopefully that will disseminate into the rest of the organization, and I can actually start transferring or transforming the culture of the organization. And then if you think about that, Jatinder, if you get the culture of an organization right, you get a lot of other things right as a byproduct. You get equity and diversity right. There's too much noise around equality and diversity nowadays, and consequently, I was just having a laugh about this with some friends that I met the other day. I've known these people for 30, 40 years. We're all people of color. We've all been in the police service, and we were fighting the battle for equality
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago when we first set up the
Wow.
Black Police Association, which, then we had offshoots like the Sikh Association, the Muslim Association, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And the language and the rhetoric that organizations are using now is exactly what they were using 20, 30 years ago. They were still talking about, we need X percent of Black, brown people. We need X percent of women, X percent of LGBTQ. Well, if that is the case, how is it that we're still talking about chasing these percentages 30, 40 years later?
Yeah.
And actually, with the increase in representation that you've got, how have you changed is my question. So for me, when you get an EQ culture in place, what that does as a byproduct anyway is that everybody comes to work and they have an equality of opportunity to share their thoughts, to feel valued, appreciated, heard, and seen.
Yeah.
And if you get that right, then you don't need to worry about representation, what I would call demographic representation. You don't need to worry about demographic diversity. All you need to do is make sure you embed cognitive diversity, where people feel free and safe, psychologically safe, to share their own experiences, their own opinions, their own thoughts from their own individual journey. So in a very convoluted kind of way, I'm trying to demonstrate how just focusing in on emotional intelligence for me has allowed me to work with so many different areas. So I now work with equality and diversity, but in a different way to what most EDI people do. I work with public speaking. I do a lot of public speaking. I've done over like 200 public, keynote speeches since 2020, online, offline. So we've just designed a two-day program called Create and Speak, which was running before lockdown, but we've revamped it completely since then. More suited towards leaders than anybody else. I wanted to niche in towards leaders, but I wanted to offer the highest value. So there's a lot of emotional intelligence within our public speaking as well. And now that's just been accredited by the Institute Leadership Management. So anybody who comes on the program not only gets a CPD certificate, they get an Institute Leadership Management certificate. They get letters after their name. They become a member, instant member of the Institute. They get access to 400 hours worth of leadership content through their portal. They get free networking, free magazine from the Institute. I want them to be real leaders because I believe good communication is the foundation stone of good leadership. All great leaders are good communicators, and all good communicators are good at building relationships. So again, it's all linked into to emotional intelligence. And finally,
100%, man. 100%. I mean, it's so amazing for you to share this because I know how much of an impact it's had on my life, right? And I remember reading, I think I memorized the quote as well. I think it was a Daniel Goleman quote, which said that emotional intelligence is the ability to monitor your own and other people's feelings and emotions, and then to monitor those feelings and emotions to pursue and attain goals. Right. Yeah. And I was blown away. I was like thinking, hang on a minute, if I'm able to regulate and manage my own emotions and, then I'm able to share that with other people and help them do it as well. Absolutely. Isn't this going to create a good culture? And I did exactly that way, because when I used to, so after leaving uni, I worked with Sun Microsystems, which is a Fortune 500 company, right? And when I joined the team, there was like 3 of us, I think. And then by the time I left, we were about 20 or something. And throughout that whole journey, that was the key thing. It was the emotional intelligence. And I know how much it has an impact on culture. That's why I'm like, so super.
Oh, massive, yes. Massive. And here's the thing, when we talk about EQ, EI, when we talk about any of these people-related skills, people think of it as a term that's used, and you used it earlier on, soft skills, because that's what the industries out there call it. But actually, when you think about it, EQ is much, much more important than IQ. Much more important. Yeah. Emotional intelligence skills are much more important than technical skills in the workplace. Now, hear me out. I think IQ is relevant, is important. You go to school, you get your qualifications, and those qualifications help you to go and take your A-levels. You take your A-levels. The A-levels allow you to take degrees. You get your degree. You either go in for a job or you go in for a master's. You get your master's qualification. You either go on and do a PhD or you go and get a job. Now, each one of these qualifications is a step up to take you to somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
When you get to that destination, you want to excel at some point, right? It is not your technical skills that are going to allow you to excel. It is
Exactly.
your emotional intelligence skills. It is your ability to read and regulate your own emotions. It's your ability to read the emotions and build rapport with other people. It's your ability to read the organization, your team, your environment, your community, to understand how it really ticks and then get into that groove. And it's your ability to build relationships. These are not technical skills. These are emotional intelligence skills, but by far, they are much harder than these so-called soft skills that the industries have very often talked about. I saw an article from the BBC not so very long ago where they said that the number one skill set, one of the top skill sets that organizations are going to be looking for from here on in, is emotional intelligence.
Oh, wow.
The World Economic Forum was way ahead of them. Back in 2016, the World Economic Forum said that one of the top skill sets that organizations will be looking for by 2020 is emotional intelligence. Now, we know what happened in 2020. Since 2020, the environment in the workplace has changed. We've gone through things called the Great Resignation. We've gone through things where we've seen the highest turnover of staff in modern history. We've seen things like, and this is much more hidden, quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is where people are not happy with where they work, but they don't want to leave the organization. So what they'll do, they'll work to the very minimum standards, quietly quitting.
Yeah. Wow.
So your people are not being inspired to be the very best that they can be. They're not working to their full potential. They're just working to whatever. They just want to get those 8 hours out of the way. That's not healthy. So with all of this kind of stuff there, and of course, we're going into a winter of discontent, aren't we? Where there's so many threats of legal action, strike action across the public sector and across other industries as well. It is not all about pay. This is not all about pay. People are not going on strike just because of pay. Pay is important, and because that's the financial constraints that we find ourselves in across the world, and certainly in this country with the rising price of fuel and the cost of living, et cetera, inflation. So of course, people want a wage that is cognizant of that and allows them to lead at least a life where they can survive rather than just thrive. But they also want to feel happy in their workplace. So a lot of people who are striking or threatening to strike, think about the nurses, think about I know the police can't strike, but there was a documentary on not so very long ago called on a program called Dispatches on Channel 4, which is still available, I understand, on all four, called Cops in Crisis. And it talked about the huge turnover of staff in the police service. People are leaving in droves. It's the same in education. Teachers are leaving in droves. People are not happy. And because they're not happy, we have to get the magnifying glass out. We have to understand what it is. And I think the politicians simplify it far, far too much by saying this is all about money. It's not. It's about much, much more. And I think we need to start looking at how the context of leadership, the quality of the leadership in this country. And we need to understand what kind of a culture do we want to create across all our industries in the UK. The UK is now a small island sitting by itself, having left Europe, has to play its game in the big wide world. It's something like the 5th or 6th largest economy. It has dropped 1 point. I think India overtook it sometime earlier this year. We need to raise the barrel, and one of the things that we need to do is improve the quality of the leadership here, quality of performance, quality of productivity. And the way to do that is not just by paying people more, it's about inspiring people to do more.
Yeah. Kul for Prime Minister. Yeah. 100%, man. You're talking about like relationships. I mean, that was my biggest takeaway from all of this as well, because like I said, like when I was in that environment, started working with the teams and the people. And as I went through, from there I went into like customer services, and I was just working with the customer, and I realized that when you talk to them properly, you respect them and all this kind of thing, the way they respond to you is very different to 100%. How they respond to like the salesperson who was in like that retail environment, for example, right? And that just stuck with me. So I started taking that customer service element, saying, no, it's all about the person. Let's respect them. Let's understand what they're about. And over the years, that's been the common thread, to realize that it's the relationships built over the years.
Yes.
Right. That has done so much like around me, if that makes sense. Because one,
perfect.
the type of people I end up connecting with, like, you know, like yourself through all of this. I think we first met at the London Yes Group, right? Which is a
We did,
personal
yeah.
development
Yeah, I think I was
community.
speaking there, wasn't I?
That's right. That's right. And so that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't in that space, for example. But what I wanted to just share on that was that is well, that key thing you said about relationships, understanding people. And everybody can do that. And it doesn't matter, like you said, on your IQ, because IQ is more like your memory and this and the other. Whereas this thing is human. This is what we do every day. It's all about people, right? So if we don't build those relationships and connection with people and build that deep rapport, what's the point? I mean, there's nothing on this planet without people, if you think about it.
Yeah. And you know, here's the thing. I mean, so many people say, "Oh, I'm naturally not like this, and I'm naturally not like that, and I can't build a relation. I can't speak to people." That's nonsense. Emotional intelligence is just a science. It's a science, and like anything else, it can be learned. You know, when I first took my first EQ test, I came out as exceptional, but I came out with a score that was in the low 300s, and the score is out of 400 on the test that we take. When I took the same test a couple of years later, I was 350. So I jumped about 30, 40 points in those 2 years, purely because I worked on a couple of competencies. And that was about a year ago. And I took it recently, and I'm now in the 360s. So I'm like a hair's breadth away from 400, my magic figure. I don't particularly want to get to 400. I just want to see that I'm improving all the time.
Yes.
I'm going in the right direction. I'm not going in the wrong direction, you know? And I think there's two things that people want out there. And that is they want to, when they, you know, you're talking about sales, when they buy something, they want to see quality. They want to see a quality of the product. Now, in this industry of personal development and leadership coaching and all the other things that you can put titles to, it's also quite a dirty industry in the sense that there's a lot of people out there delivering their services without qualifications, without the experience, without the passion, without the depth, you know, and we know that exists. And I used to get really frustrated, but now I say, hey, what's the point? I can't change that. So all I can do is offer the very best value, make sure I am absolutely qualified, make sure I've got my insurances in place. That I spend a lot of money just getting the very top insurance because I want to be seen as being somebody at the top end of their game. I take what I do very seriously. I didn't have to get all my accreditations, accreditations and qualifications for my public speaking course. I haven't seen a public speaking program, and I've been on several around the country and internationally, that have got the level of accreditations that we're offering for our program. And yet I see these programs being offered for £2,000 or £3,000. I have spent £5,000 on one going to America, but I'm launching mine next year for just £500 for my 2-day intensive program. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to spread this value-driven quality wherever I go. And I want people to understand the context that emotional intelligence plays in the relationship building. And when it comes to public speaking, you are still building relationships. You're building relationships between you and the audience. And there's emotional intelligence in that as well. So EQ is not just about one-to-one. It's about one-to-many as well. So I want people to start learning these skill sets. So I don't badge everything as EQ, but EQ plays a part in absolutely everything that I do. Absolutely everything I do. We're launching a youth leadership program next year that is specifically going to target the underprivileged youth who have spent their lives in care, whether it's private children's homes or whether it's foster care. I want to, and often society just writes these youngsters off. But I think the depth and breadth of experience and challenges they've had in their lives, if I could just equip them with the right skill sets, leadership skill sets, the EQ skill sets, what kind of leaders are we going to produce there? You know, are we going to produce leaders that are different to the kind of leaders that we have right now? That's exactly what I want to do. I want to produce these leaders that have got depth, that have been places, seen hardship, and therefore have more emotional resilience. That's what I want to do going forward. So EQ plays a part in everything that we do, every single service that we provide, every course that I design, every consultancy that I do. I just don't talk about EQ all the time necessarily, but it's at the heart of everything that we do.
Exactly. I mean, it's like you were saying, like, you know, you got public speaking, you're putting yourself out there as a personal brand. right?
Yeah.
So then you look at how that gets reflected across your personal brand and how you're coming across, and then how that filters through. So you're 100% that, you know, EQ is not just this one level. There's like so much depth to it, and it goes across everything we do, from rapport, from like we were talking about earlier just before the call about online marketing, how you you know, connect and resonate with your audience online. Because if you're able to serve the content that you're creating, for example, in a way that links with these emotional values, right, it's most likely going to impact and connect with the audience more so than, you know, just something else, like some widget here and there, whatever, that kind of thing, right?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've just started this year to play around with developing online programs, and we have an old version of our public speaking program, Create and Speak, where we've got 40 odd videos where we'd actually videoed a whole course before we got it to we revamped it and got it changed, accredited by the ILM. And that's available now online for just like 30 quid. Why? Because those people who can't afford coming to me for that personal, in-depth experience can at least take something away.
Yeah, taste of it, right?
The emotional intelligence is still ingrained within that program. There is very little that they're going to learn more by coming on the face-to-face. It's just more in-depth, that's all. So EQ,
yeah, you're right. With any
EQ
kind of scenario.
Everything.
Yeah. It's that scenario that, you know, it's like that. See, this is what was really cool, is that you create the videos, you're creating content which you're giving online, and people will take something away from that. And when they're in person, it's a totally different ball game.
Totally, of course.
And this was one of the things that came up when I was doing my dissertation. Right, one of the questions there was, okay, if you create like a whole bunch of questions and you gave questions to someone, they're going to sit down and they're going to think about the scenario, try in order to answer the question, right?
Yeah.
But when you're actually in the environment, that's where the whole emotional intelligence thing is talking about, is that what you do in the environment with what you have available to you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the key differentiator. And when they're in that environment to learn it one-to-one, next level, absolutely.
It is. And no matter how good your online programs are, you just can't build that factor in, can you? That personal factor, that ability to have eye-to-eye contact with someone, to ask that question. You just can't build that in, no matter how good the software might be. So that's why I thought, well, let's have the offering there. Let's have the program there for people who want to just buy it online and take away the skills that I talk about. But we have to have the face-to-face program still. So that's why we're launching our face-to-face program in February. And I believe in our program so much that, and I've done this for the last 3 or 4 years, I have an annual event called Ignite Your Inner Potential. As you know, it was one of the fastest growing personal development programs in the UK before COVID.
Yeah.
We started in 2017 with just 80 people in the room. By 2020, just before lockdown, we had our last one and we had 350 people in the room. So it used to grow by about 100 every year, which is fine for me. And this year it should have been around about 600, 650. That's where we wanted it to be. Well, of course, we've not had it for the last couple of years. So what we're doing, we're taking a step back and we're bringing it out in 2023 with 350. But what we've always done is all the speakers on the stage, and I normally have 4 or 5 speakers, they are all chosen by me from the Create and Speak programs, from our public speaking programs. I choose them and I offer them the opportunity of standing on our stage for 20, 30 minutes, delivering a really powerful talk. And I also provide them with one-to-one coaching for free to do that. And that's how much I believe in everything that we do. You know, I've never been let down yet. And that's important.
That's so awesome. So cool. For all those people who are wondering, okay, what could I do? How do I start tapping into emotional intelligence? Like, what are steps I can do now to start to open my mind to it? What kind of tips would you be able to give to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is know your 4 quadrants on emotional intelligence. You know, guys, you only have to Google this to know what they are. The first quadrant is self-awareness. And we talk about self-awareness. You know, if you've been in the field of personal development long enough, you know that self-awareness is something that everybody talks about all the time. And the best leaders in the world are the most self-aware leaders. And that is not just a cliche, it's the absolute truth. So self-awareness is so very important. And when I talk about self-awareness, what I'm saying is know how you show up in the world, know the emotions that are running through your mind, because hey, we all are animals, we all have the same kind of brains, we all have therefore the limbic brain and the amygdala, which are your fear receptors in your brain. These are designed to keep you alive and safe, and have been around since we were running around being chased by saber-toothed tigers, mammoths, or whatever else we were being chased by. They were designed to keep us safe. But here's the thing, we don't face physical danger so much nowadays. What we face now is psychological danger. And the thing about psychological danger is something that we contrive in our own mind. So what I might find psychologically dangerous, somebody else might say, hey, that's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. So always be aware of what's going on in your mind, whether it's the language, the emotions, and then know how these play out into the thoughts and the actions that you take. Once you've analyzed that and you've picked up on a couple of actions that you are not happy with, I don't know, whether it's a habit that you've got, whether you pick your nose, or whether you fly off the handle very quickly, or whether it's, you got road rage and you're sitting in the driver's seat every time somebody cuts you up, and you just go crazy for a few seconds, and then realize a few minutes later how stupid you feel now because you said things that you ordinarily won't say, or you pretend that there's a button on your steering wheel with a laser and you want to zap this person out of existence. Understand that, know that. And when you know that, then quadrant 2 is all about, well, undoing that behavior. Now, I wrote a book on behaviors, on habits, because 20 years ago, 18 years ago now, I gave up drinking, I gave up smoking, I gave up meat, I gave up fish, I gave up eggs, I gave up eating so much just literally overnight. And I realized the habits are not physical. Habits are in the mind. Every habit that we make, whether even if our bodies are craving for something, the choice that we make to have that thing comes from the mind, not from the body. So once I understood that, I learned to give up so many other habits, like, 8 years ago, gave up drinking tea, coffee, fizzy drinks, and fruit juices overnight. 6 years ago, I gave up drinking milk overnight. And what I realized with habits is, A, you've got to replace the habit with a healthy habit. That's the first thing you've got to do. And B, you've got to persevere for those first 2, 3, 4 weeks, when that habit can then stabilize and become your new norm, your new unconscious behavior, your new unconscious competence, as they call it. So that is the second quadrant. Your third quadrant is really switching on the radars. Imagine that you've got 2 antennae in your head and they're constantly scoping your environment. Look for the undercurrents in the conversations that you have. Notice how people respond to certain things. Maybe they're verbally, maybe you're looking at people's tonality, maybe you're looking for the decisions that are made that make you go, hey, how did that come about? Well, explore how it came about. Look more closely into how decisions are made. So that for me is really, really important for us to begin to understand that the environment in which we're in is not necessarily what is written in the policies and practices, the guidance and the regulations. It's far more than that, because we live in a human world and humans are very complex animals. Once you've understood all of that, then I want you to start practicing on having quality conversations with people. When you interact with people, particularly if you're in sales, I see this all the time. I get messages all the time on LinkedIn, Facebook. Hey, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to connect with you. So you connect with them, and next thing you know, bang, do you want to buy that? Do you want to buy that? And I want to say, hey, do you want to buy some coaching from me? Because I'm an expert in relationship building. And I'm really fatigued by this kind of nonsensical kind of language. But hey, that's the world in which we exist. We're in a very fast-moving, dynamic world where superficiality for what I see as superficiality is actually the norm for many, many people. Why? Because they just lack the experience and the depth and the gravitas and the understanding of what a relationship is. So take time out, listen effectively, listen with your whole body to when somebody else is saying something. Don't just listen to the words. Look at the body language, look at the facial expressions, listen to the tonality. There's a great piece of work done by a guy called Albert Morabian. Albert Morabian looked at, really studied long and hard communication. And he said, did you know? Well, he came up with a conclusion that only 7% of the impact that we have on other people in our communication comes from the words, the actual words that we use. 93% of the impact that we have on other people is actually with our tonality, facial expressions, body language, hand gestures, all of that. So look out for that. When you're having a conversation with somebody, look out for the hand gestures. This is why I focus on facial expressions, hand gestures, tonality so much in our public speaking course, because it is so critical in good communication. But on the flip side, when somebody else is communicating to you, start listening to that. And only then can you start building relationships.
Yeah. And that was that last bit there was the fourth quadrant, you said, yeah? Yeah.
Relationship building, fourth quadrant.
Relationship, exactly. You see, like, just from those four quadrants, like what you've just shared there, like, I'm sure people listening to this can start to relate that, wow, it's like getting present, listening, looking, observing, right? And listening to the chatter that's going on up here as well, in order to deepen that relationship and connection with the person in front of you. And this is so amazing, because one of the things I wanted to do was, like, how Napoleon Hill went around interviewing, people around wealth creation and what it was, and then he created a whole book around it to say this is what wealth is, how they've done it. I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I interviewed the experts to find out what they thought about rapport, what it is, how does it work, and all that kind of thing, and just to see what the common thread is between them. And this, what you just sharing, just comes across all the time. All the time, absolutely. Right? So if you look at the common threads, there must be some truth in that, right?
I mean, you only have to pick up Stephen Covey's book on 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and you look at how these 7 laws that he talks about, and this book is old. This book has been around a long, long time. But if you look at that book, and, one of the laws is seek first to understand, not to be understood, i.e. learn to listen first before you open your mouth, right? And I love age-old adages. So, like, old sayings, I love old sayings because there's so much truth in old sayings. Like, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Yeah. You should listen more and speak less, which is a fundamental rule in coaching, as we all know, So I think there's so much truth, and none of it's hidden away. It's not like the book, The Secret. There is no secret. The only secret is unlocking the potential that exists within our own mind. Yeah. And all we have to do is unlock that. And people say to me, how do you get involved in so many things? I mean, for example, we've just got on BBC iPlayer there, a police drama called Granite Harbour, which, if anybody watches it, and by the way, it is good. I binge watched it I reluctantly put it off for like a week, and then I eventually binge watched it with my wife. Yeah. That was a program. In the opening gambit, you'll see that it's based on a story by Kul Mahay, and all that was a story that I had about Commonwealth citizens joining the British Army, and then when they come to the end of their service, why not use them to join the British Police Service, and transferable skills, all that. And we had this idea of somebody from a Caribbean country coming into the army, leaving the army, joining the police service under this special scheme, and ending up in Aberdeen and sorting, investigating all these incredible crimes. A production company picked it up because we just built relationships with them, quite frankly. Yeah. They spoke to us and said, we like your idea, and can we talk further? And we talked further, and they really liked it, took it to BBC, and BBC Scotland loved it. And now it's there on screen and TV. We've written another drama that we're in discussions with other production companies with. I'm writing a book. I'm writing 2 books, actually. One book is around emotional intelligence and what I call human-centered thinking. And one is another police drama. Why I'm doing that is just because it's fun. It's just another relief, really, more than anything else. So, I'm 56 years old now, and I keep telling myself that you get to this stage of your life, and you go to more funerals than you do to weddings, and you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And every day is an opportunity for a new day, and to stay eternally young, keep your brain active. Keep looking forward. Don't get stuck in the negativity of the world. Don't allow yourself to get into that whirlpool of negativity. Think on your own 2 feet. Look beyond the horizon that others are searching for. When people turn right, you turn left, and say yes to everything that comes in your life. And constantly be growing yourself moving forward. That's the secret of success, I think.
Absolutely, man. I mean, you've just dropped some bombshells there with like, I mean, look, we were talking about emotional intelligence and it's led us all the way to the internet, to public speaking, to TV, to books, right? And it's all got that seed, it's got the connection. And like you said, it's the relationships have got you there, because of the building of the relationship, the adding and exchange of values there. And I think this is so important in anything that anything that anyone does, right? And that's why I wanted to get you on the call, because I know how important it is. I know what kind of impact it's had on me. And I thought, okay, I did that back in 2004-ish, roughly, right? And I'm just thinking, okay, that was 2004. What's happening in that space now? And so thank you for sharing, all the kind of stuff you're up to with this and what's going on in this space and stuff. And I know before we sign off, is there any last words that you want to share? And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for that to happen?
Well, I mean, I love contacting people. I love being in connection with people. You can reach me direct at my email, Kul, that's Kul, at Kul Mahay, KulMahay.com. I look forward to hearing your emails. But my simple advice going forward is don't fall into the trap of thinking that these kind of skill sets and qualities that we're talking about are in this bucket of soft skills. This bucket of soft skills was a term created by people who don't understand the power of them, quite frankly. And these terms were created way back in the 70s and 80s, and they are no longer relevant in the 2020s now. We have now gone through 3 generations of people. The generation Z that we have now, who have come into the marketplace, in the working marketplace, they understand values more than my generation does. So understand your values, do some deep thinking, really know your values. Don't just guess your values, know your values, do the hard work first. And don't just swap and borrow the values of your organization. Know you, know yourself. And then when you know yourself, then all your decisions, I mean, I could go on to talk about decision making and how at 2:00 in the morning, I was able to make really powerful life and death decisions within seconds of waking up. Why? Because I followed a decision-making model that was all centered around my values. I know my values, and all my decisions are based around my values in a very structured kind of way. So I make sure I do objective thinking when it comes to decision-making. So that's what I would say. There's so much I could go on about.
I know. I was just going to say that we're going to have to do a few series of these in the future and have you back at one stage to talk about some of this other stuff as well. But on that note, Kul, you know what? I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for sharing.
You're so welcome.
And wish you all the best with all of the TV ventures and everything. And I'm looking forward to watching those with your book, your workshop, your seminars, all that kind of stuff. And, peeps learn about emotional intelligence is one of the best things you will ever do. And thank you on that note, Kul. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All the very best.
Thank you very much. All right, signing out.